Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Educare 247. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have gone through the previous video in which we talked about the preparation strategy for PMP exam 2021. Our topic for today's discussion is managing conflict. This is the task 1 under people domain as per the content outlined by PMI for PMP exam 2021. As all of you know that 42% questions will be asked from people domain and it's distributed among 14 tasks. And this is one of the tasks. You can expect 3 to 4% questions from this topic and that will be around 6 to 7 questions approximately. Please watch till the end as each and every topic discussed during this session is very important and will be helpful in solving scenario based questions which is usually being asked in the exam. By the way, you can connect me on LinkedIn and Telegram. The links are given in the description box. Also, please subscribe this channel to get the high quality videos and very useful for PMP exam. We'll start with the different views of the conflict. Then we will move to the sources and stages of the conflict. Then we will talk about how to analyze the context for the conflict. Then we will talk about the various resolution technique for the conflict. And at the last, and it's very important, we will see some scenario based questions and we will see how to solve it. First, let me ask a question. Is conflict bad? I'm sure 50% of you might think it's bad. And on the same line, we must avoid the situations where conflict occurs. And that's the old school of thought. And that's where the first point lies. If you see here, the first point says conflict is to be avoided. And that leads to the second point, which says conflict is dysfunctional and caused by personality differences. And it's resolved by higher management. Now, there will always be, with the organizational perspective, there will always be personality differences. And that gives the birth of new school of thought. That is, conflict is an inevitable consequences of organizational interactions. And the beauty of conflict is it leads to the transformation. The third point says conflict is resolved through openness, identifying the causes, problem solving by the people involved and their immediate managers. Now, in the modern era, for conflict transformation practitioners, there is the agreement that says conflict can't be prevented. Conflict needs to be more than managed, and that's interesting. Conflict resolution is narrower in scope. Also, as per the new school of thought, mediators and negotiators try to think differently about conflict and the work they are doing to address it. So they began to describe the conflict not as a problem to solve it in narrow sense, but to see conflict as a symptom of deeper issues that needed attention. Conflict not as a problem to fix, but as a means to change. It is not so dangerous, but as an opportunity or catalyst for constructive change. In the previous slide, we talked about the inevitable nature of the conflict, and that is due to different factors such as the nature of projects which solve the problem or address the needs and requirement of many stakeholders. The other factor is limitations of power for each stakeholder defined by organization. So there must be a common source from where conflict arises. As all of you know, developing an acceptable project schedule is an iterative process. Schedule development requires the review and revision of duration estimates, resource estimates, and schedule reserve to reach the schedule baseline. if the baseline is not set correctly in the beginning, then it might lead to unrealistic schedule development, and that gives the birth of conflict for the resource. And we can apply the same analogy for cost. As if you're going to create a schedule which is unrealistic, then definitely your cost also going to be impacted. Next source of conflict may be scarce resource with required skill set and personal work styles. As an example, if you're working as a project manager in a software development project and you need a resource who knows about relational database, however, at the same time, if the same resource is not available, then definitely the conflict arises between you and your functional manager. Other source is project scope and project priority. Let's assume in the start of the project, a set of activity and task was planned to accomplish the particular milestone. And in the middle of the project and phase, there is an alteration in the scope which further leads to the schedule disturbances, and hence your cost also going to be impacted, and that definitely leads to the conflict. And also different stakeholders compete to set the right priority of the project, and if they're not going to get a consensus, then definitely it again going to leads to a conflict. Other source of conflict are technical opinion and different approaches for problem solving. Let's say you are working in a project and which is currently in design phase, and two different architect or designer are working on a particular design, and they come up with a different design approaches which is not proven yet which one give you the best result. Then definitely you have to choose one in order to implement in your project. But if you're not going to choose the other one, then definitely there is a conflict between those two designers. The other source of conflict are administrative procedures. It let's say it's not suits your personal style of working. And the last one is the competing requirement given by different stakeholders. Let's understand the different stages of the conflict. The first stage of the conflict is latent conflict, in which the factors that could become a cause of potential conflict. These are divergence goals, role conflict, and competition for scarce resources. At this stage, participant yet not aware of the conflict. The second stage is perceived. Conflict may sometimes arise even if no condition of latent conflict exists. It is said to result from the parties misunderstanding each other from their true position. In this case, conflict may be resolved by simply improving communication between affected parties. The third one is felt stage. The felt stage of conflict concentrates on emotions coming into play for affected parties. Two people are aware that they are having a conflict in the workplace. It contributes to feeling of stress and anxiety. We also called it personalization of conflict. The fourth one is manifest. At this stage, conflict is open and can be observed. In other words, one person continuously blocks another person's goal and achievement. It also leads to physical and verbal violences. The last one is aftermath. The aftermath of a conflict refer to its outcome, which can be positive or negative. On positive side, both the parties are satisfied and happy after the conflict resolution. On negative side, conflict may be suppressed and not resolved. Till this topic, we have built up the foundation for next topic, and from where our actual job starts. As a project manager or servant leader, whatever your role is in different project development life cycle, You are responsible for analyzing the context of the conflict and need to facilitate and choose different conflict resolution technique. These topic we talked about in upcoming slides, so please watch till the end and complete the task 1 under people domain, and then we will solve few scenario based questions based on conflict. The success of project manager in managing their project team often depends on their ability to resolve conflict. Different project managers may use different conflict resolution methods. There are 5 general techniques for resolving conflict. The first one is collaborate. You see here, with this technique, parties openly discuss differences and try to incorporate multiple viewpoints to arrive at consensus. Collaboration always leads to the win-win situation for both the parties. Now the second is smoothing or accommodate. This technique includes making some concessions, and it emphasizes agreement rather than differences of opinion. It emphasizing areas of agreement rather than areas of differences. It does not result in a permanent or complete resolution of the conflict. The third one is withdrawal or avoid. With this technique, parties retreat or postpone a decision on a problem. However, as a project manager, we have to deal with the problem. So, withdrawal is not usually the best choice for resolving conflict, though there may be situation where it is necessary. You will understand all this technique in the next slide with a quadrant format. Now the next is forcing. This technique involves pushing one viewpoint at the expense of others. It is win-lose situation. The last one is compromise or reconcile. This technique involves finding solutions that bring some degree of satisfaction for both the parties. This is always lose-lose situation, and it is not a best choice for resolving conflict. In the previous slide, we talked about the 5 different methods for conflict resolution. Now let's discuss in detail what are the factors that influence conflict resolution methods, which include such as the relationship and the importance of issues. There are some other factors as well. Let's say the relative power for the people involved in the conflict, a motivation to resolve conflict on a long term or short term basis. But for the time being, I have taken these 2 factors into consideration, and out of this we have to decide which of the 5 different methods for conflict resolution is suitable. So if you see here, there is a x-axis. At the positive side we have high concern, and at the negative side we have a low concern. Similarly, on y-axis, at the positive side we have high concern, and at the negative side we have a low concern. So if you see at the quadrant, if your issues are important, because it is at the positive side, if your issues are important but your relationship is not so important, so your issues are of high concern but relationship is of the low concern, then you go with the forcing method. You have to push one viewpoint to another because it's a temporary one. You have to resolve the issue that is more important rather than keeping the relationship healthy. Okay. The next one is, if you see, just opposite, if your issues are important or and your relationship is also important, so both are of the high concern, then you go with the collaborating or cooperating style of conflict resolution method. Okay. Just opposite, if your issues are not so important, if you say it's of low concern but relationship is important, In that case, you go with the accommodating method of the conflict resolution technique. Now, when your relationship is not so important, it is of the low concern, and your issues are also not so important, it is also of the low concern, then you avoid the situation and you avoid the conflict and you suppress it, you can defer it, because there is no point, as both the factor is not so important and it is of the low concern. Now if you see the compromising, it shares all the quadrant. Why? Because it can be in any of the factor or any of the situation. So in the previous slide we already discussed, this is not the best choice for resolving conflict. Why? Because it always lies into the lose-lose situation. That's all for the factors for issues and relationship and choosing a method for conflict resolution. In the previous slide, we talked about factors due to which we understand that conflict is inevitable. Those factors can be potential causes for the conflict. Now here we are going to talk about how to analyze the context for the conflict. If you know your source well and if you're aware about the factors, you can definitely reach to the potential conflict causes. Now for the project managers or for the servant leader, there should be some ready-made tool available by which they can easily analyze the context for the conflict. The PMI will not directly ask the questions from these tools, but this will be helpful for project managers to implement it at the workplace. And similarly, they can, by using this tool or these tools, they can analyze the context in a very simpler manner. The first one is the ABC tool. What it stands for: attitude, behavior, and context. What does it mean? So it says that the first part is attitude. So attitude says that capture one party feelings, stereotypes, and perceptions about a situation and how they perceive the other party feelings, stereotype, and perceptions. This is all about the attitude for parties involved in the conflict. Now the next part is behavior. List one party actions to the situation. That's come under behavior category. The third one is context. Provide the context and result of each party in the situation. You have to list down all these things for all the parties involved in the conflict, and then you have to analyze the context for the conflict. The second one is the onion tool method. So onion tool says there are three different elements: positions, interests, and needs for a particular party. Position says list what party says they want. I repeat, list what party says actually they want. Now next is interest. List out what the party really wants. Now next is needs. List out what the party must have. So you have to note down these three details for all the parties involved into the conflict, and then you can reach to the context for the conflict with this analysis. The last one is the tree tool. The tree tool asks you to list down effects, core problem, and roots. Effect is list the consequences of the conflict and the impact it has had on those parties involved. Now next is core problem. Describe the event or situation that is the conflict itself. And the next is root. Provide all the potential causes for the conflict. This is one of the best method to analyze the context for the conflict out of these three, and this will be very helpful as you have some ready-made tool available to do this task. Now let's start solving few questions. The question number 1 is, you are a project manager of a software development project. Two highly skilled and knowledgeable designers on your project are in conflict over the best technical solution designed to meet the project requirement. However, this is not affecting the project schedule. Who is initially responsible for the conflict resolution? I'll give you 20-second time to read all the options, then we will explain and mark the correct answer. So if you see here, the keyword is initially. Two team members are in the conflict, and in the beginning or initially, both team members are initially responsible for the conflict resolution. So the correct answer is C. If they will not be resolved, they will not be able to resolve the conflict, then their immediate managers need to intervene and need to resolve the conflict. Question number 2. You are working as a project manager in cloud-based implementation project. Long hours of work to meet a looming deadline and immense pressure for success from management are causing a decline in team morale. There are occasional conflicts between team members over priorities and resources. How should these non-disruptive conflicts be handled? I'll again give you 20 seconds time to go through all the options, then we will explain and mark the correct answer. Okay, the right answer is B. If you see, the conflict should be resolved as early as possible. A private, direct, and collaborative approach should be employed first. So as already we have explained in the previous slides, the best way of resolving the conflict is collaboration. Question number 3. As a project manager, you scheduled a task review meeting. During the meeting, a problem developed and the group discussed about it. The day after the meeting, Sarah, one of your team members, approached you and expressed her concern that the problem was not fully resolved. After thinking about it, she felt that her concerns were still valid and should be addressed. What conflict resolution method was likely used at the status meeting? Kindly review all the options. I'll again give you 15 seconds time. We will explain and mark the correct answer. Let's start eliminating the wrong answer. So D is definitely not an answer. Why? Because if you could have used D, collaboration method, then definitely your conflict was resolved fully. But in the question it says problem was not fully resolved. C is also not an answer. Why? Because you haven't avoided the conflict, you haven't withdrawn it. So because team discussed about it during the meeting. Forcing is also not an answer because we haven't put one viewpoint to at the expense of other viewpoint. So A is the right answer. If you see, smoothing is the method that was most likely used to resolve the conflict that arose at the status meeting, and smoothing is used to resolve the conflict temporarily. And if you see here, after the meeting, Sarah raised the concern. It means that conflict was resolved partially, not fully. Question number 4. Rebecca and Caroline are two team members in a project. They do not get along well and are constantly involved in verbal conflicts. The project manager understands the characteristics of conflict and the conflict management process and tries to resolve the situation. Which of the following is not a correct statement about conflict? First, go through all the 4 options. We will explain and mark the correct answer. I'll give you again 15 seconds time. Okay, so if you see the question at the last line, it says which of the following is not not a correct statement about conflict. It's asking not a correct statement. So first you mark the correct statement. The first one is openness resolves conflict. So this is the correct statement. So this is not a answer, right? The second one is conflict is natural and forces a search for alternatives. As you already know, we have explained in the first slide that conflict is transformative. The beauty of conflict is it leads to a transformation. So this is also a correct statement and this is not the answer. If you see the third one, conflict is inevitable in a project environment. As per the new thought of the conflict, this is also a correct statement and not the answer. So the answer is D. The project manager is not responsible for conflict management. Obviously, it's a false statement. Why? Because project team members are initially responsible for resolution of their conflicts. If conflicts escalates, the project manager should help and resolve it. So this is not a right statement. So this is the right answer. Question number 5. A project manager manages a distributed team with team members located in 5 countries. Due to time zone differences, he cannot find a time that is acceptable to all team members. Which conflict resolution technique is best suited for this situation? Please go through all the options. I'll give you 10 seconds time. We will mark the correct answer after 10 seconds. Okay, now let's explain the correct answer. First, we will eliminate the wrong answer. D is not the answer. Why? Because we are not avoiding this kind of conflict. We are trying to resolve it. So D is not the answer. Withdraw, definitely the same thing. It's not the answer. Force, we are not forcing anyone to come at the particular time. So this is also not the answer. So the answer is compromise. So if you want an explanation, a compromise requires searching for options that bring some degree of satisfaction to all parties in order to temporarily or partially resolve the conflict. So this would be the best to handle the current situation since time zone differences are not under anyone's control, right? Question number 6. Reena and Mohit are the senior developers in a website development project. They have argued about the best web design product to use in developing the new website. As a project manager, you use a forcing approach to decide and reduce the conflict. What is the main characteristics of this approach? First, go through all the options. I'll give you again 15 seconds time. We will explain and mark the correct answer. Okay, so we have already discussed about the forcing approach. Correct answer is C. If you see here, asserting one's viewpoint at the expense of others. Project managers must resolve conflict as early as possible in order to improve the productivity and generate positive working relationship. Forcing is a conflict method or conflict resolution technique in which one's viewpoint is asserted at the expense of others. Question number 7. Two of your expert team members have been in a heated argument over the use of a new software product for your research project. Recently, you noticed that the argument, instead of increasing creativity, is causing conflict between the team members. To prevent the conflict from escalating, you want to resolve it by open dialogue and evaluating alternatives. All the following statements about conflict are false except. So first go through all the 4 options. I'll give you 15 seconds time. We will explain and mark the correct answer. Okay, if you see that B is the right answer. Conflict is inevitable in a project environment. This is the correct statement, right? Because question says Following statements about conflict are false except, it means we have to look for the true statement, and all the false statements are wrong. So the first statement is a scarce resource cannot be a source of conflict. This is a false statement because a scarce resource definitely a source of a conflict. Similarly on C, personal work style cannot be a source of conflict. This is also a false statement. Why? Because personal work style always a source of a conflict. D is reducing the amount of conflict is not desirable. No, we always want to reduce the conflict. So this is also a false statement. So the true statement is B. Answer is B. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please subscribe to our channel for further updates. Keep learning and all the very best for your upcoming PMP exam.